2 centuries of slavery end in this week's parasha. At the beginning of Parashat Bo, God speaks to Moshe and says, Boel Paro, leman shiti ototai ele bekrbo. Go to Paro, we have more plagues that we're going to be bringing on to him, so that I can instill my signs into him, into the midst of Egypt. And leman tesaper beozne bincha uben mincha et asher hit'alalti b'Mitzrayim. And so that you should tell the tale to your children, to your children's children, about what it is that I did in Egypt. Story is at the heart of Parashat Bo and the freedom of the children of Israel. But why story? It is important for us to recognize that all story occurs in our minds, that as far as reality is concerned, events are events. There is nothing that actually connects one moment to the next outside of the memory of our minds. And what the Torah is saying to us is that is how you are meant to see life, as an unfolding saga, as a development of a great tale. What one is meant to do in one's life is to see the development and unfolding of one's life as a story. And when we think that way, we recognize that there is a flow to life. We recognize that freedom itself doesn't come as some spontaneous event that happened to occur, but rather that it was something planned by God in creation, that it was something that was put into motion generations before, that it was part of the creation, of the fashioning of these people. And so too, we learn from this is the nature of our lives. That each and every single one of our lives are subplots to the grand plot of the nature of creation and the world. And it is why the children of Israel, the people of Israel, the Jewish people, live their lives in terms of an end that has yet to come. We know that we have not seen the end. We know that there is still more to do, that the future of our people, of our nation, has not come to fruition, and that it is yet to be. And so we look at our lives as stories. We look at our lives as developments of events that are connected one to the other for an ultimate purpose and goal. Part of the nature of freedom is to see our lives that way, and to think about the living of our lives as though we are authoring a story. And so what that requires is for us to see the days of our lives, the events of our lives, not as moments in time that essentially are isolated, but how will these days, how will the events come together in the full tale of each of our lives? When we have lived our lives after 120 years, what do we want our lives to look like? What do we want the story to be told like? What should our tale sound like? Ultimately, we learn from Parashat Bo that because God says to us, you tell this story to your children, we learn that the very nature of our identity lies in story. That the ability for our minds to string these events together, to see them as whole entities, informs the nature of how it is that we live our lives. When we think this way, we recognize that every day matters, that all of the events matter, and that in order for them to be able to take their place firmly in our whole story of life, we must be present in them, and we must remember them. And we must not only recognize the story in terms of ourselves, but to tell the story of our lives, the story of those lives who came before us, to our children. Because each one of our lives are chapters in the great book of the nation of Israel. It has been an amazing story thus far, and we must ensure that our part of the story is told, and told well. It is a core element of our freedom.